Hi everybody, welcome to the webinar today. There's still some attendees coming in, so we'll just give people a chance to drop in there. But welcome, it's very sunny here in Manchester. I hope it's lovely where you are. So this webinar is about charging for care support. And the webinar is part of the Let's Talk About series. So some people might have been on other topics of discussions on these webinars, because we've done various themes and subjects that are important to people. And at the moment, what's a really hot topic is people being charged for social care and how that's done. And this is specifically for charging in social care for non-residential. I'm joined by Sally Warren, Katie Clark and Gaynor. So we are the ones that are hosting and facilitating this as part of the Be Human movement. And how to participate if you've not done this before is once the presenters have finished speaking, you'll have the option then to ask a verbal question by using that little hand there, and I'll look for you and then I'll be able to unmute you and you'll be able to unmute yourself, and then you'll be able to ask your question live on the webinar. Or if you're not happy to do that, you can type your question into this question panel and there'll be a few of us looking at them and we'll try and pick up as many as we can. If you're on an iPad, it's the same thing on this side. So again, you'll see a little hand to put your hand up, or you can ask a question in the text box. If you've any technical or other issues, please pop it in the chat box or the question box and we'll pick it up as we go along. So what to expect today? We've got a fabulous panel. We've got Katie Clark, who's the Executive Director and co-founder of Bringing Us Together. That's a community of parents of children and young people who are disabled and have special educational needs. We've got Sally Warren, who's Paradigm's Managing Director. And really, both those two have been the driving force of sort of pulling people together around this issue. We've got Mitchell Wolf, who's a solicitor practicing in human rights and civil liberties. So he's going to give us a bit of a legislative overview of the charging. And then we're joined by John Abrams from Inclusion London, who is doing some serious campaigning around the charging issue. And then we've also got Marilyn, who's a steering group member of a user-led or disabled-led organisation in Norfolk. And people might be aware that Norfolk have recently gone through a JR around the charging issue. So we've got a fabulous panel there to keep us going. We tend to run the webinars for an hour. We give it up to an hour and a half so that if we get into a discussion of questions, we don't want to just stop people abruptly. So we give people around an hour and a half. So we will be finished by 2:30 at the latest. So over to Katie and Sally. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you, Julie. And thanks for the very warm welcome. And it's great to see so many. I can see there's nearly 200 people already who've logged on to this. So we know this is, like you say, a really important, very important hot topic. So I'm going to go back a bit, a year ago. And like most of you here today, and for many across the country, there was a real sense of urgency. We were facing the unknown during that first month in lockdown. Many of us had stopped personal assistance coming into our homes. We were flooded with the amount of guidance coming out, the fear of the frailty score that affected many of us and also put disabled people into the vulnerable category. We were swamped with news briefings and the daily death count. And in those first few months, a letter arrived in the post for my daughter Nadia. It was a thick wad of paper, and I hoped it was something reassuring, something useful, like how to use our current direct payment budget, or did we furlough PAs or not? Instead, it was about care charges. And I honestly felt that this was so inappropriate at these unprecedented times. It showed a total lack of empathy, and it was shameful that it arrived at such a time. It went in the bin. We had little further contact with social services until February the 3rd this year, when into Nadia's email box came a harshly worded email from Adult Social Care charging team, saying that she was due to pay an increase in charges from £15 a week to 68, a 400% increase. We felt it was poor social care practice and showed little of any social care values. And I was so appalled by what I felt was immoral, unfair and unethical. And so I put a post on my Facebook page and received about 100 comments back within 24 hours. I also put it on our Bringing Us Together Facebook group, and I couldn't believe other people's responses, and this was happening around the country. Someone shared with me the Norfolk Challenge, and I'm so pleased that Marilyn is here today to speak, because Marilyn at that time has given us hope and confirmed that this process is unacceptable. Meanwhile, parents were responding. One person wrote, "Our situation is different as residential care, but he has all but £25 of his universal credit taken from him by the LA, the local authority." Somebody else said, "I just want to say we all understand that adult social care is seriously undervalued and underfunded. We know local authorities are struggling with their budgets, but it should not be down to the people that need the service to fund it. People have a fundamental human right to enjoy their possessions, and that includes their money. They've already been assessed as needing those benefits and funds, and it shouldn't be taken off them. Shame on you, local authorities." Somebody else said, "There is no transparency, rhyme or reason how each sum is calculated. It does appear that sadly, the more support required, the more you pay. Are they blaming a human being for having a disability?" Someone told us that if they increase my care charges, I will have to file for bankruptcy. I think it's one of the most discriminatory policy ever, that care charges, and I am 100% with you in disgust. People were feeling very emotional. We heard of people giving up their care as they couldn't afford to feed themselves, and the comments just kept coming. Sally and I have known each other for many years. I heard too that she'd been listening to stories from disabled people, so we got in touch with one another and decided we needed to get in touch with our good friends at In Control, as there was a real need to bring people together at an event like this. We needed to join the many dots to show support to those who were individually campaigning, who were writing letters, who were challenging on their own. We wanted to show support to the disability-led organisations around the country who had already taken on these issues, and who parents and disabled people could learn from, to also learn from the giants whose shoulders we walk on, such as those in Hammersmith and Fulham, Inclusion London, who are here today, and Disabled People Against the Cuts, and many more. Back in Calderdale, halfway through the pandemic, our local parent forum did a survey which has just been published for children and young people under 25 and focused on care charges. We've also started to come together for those receiving adult social care and have started a small organisation called the Alliance for Care Equality, Calderdale. And they're currently writing on disabled people's behalf and family members to the local authority, asking for further information on processes and guidance, and when the local authority is communicating with residents about their charges and during the assessment processes. During this time of a pandemic, when our backs have been turned as we clean parcels arriving, when we worry about getting PAs tested, we worry about shielding coming to an end, when mental health is on the increase and disabled people are left with little confidence about venturing out of their homes after a year, we should not be facing yet more inequalities. This is a real time for not being invisible, for us all to support one another, share information, which is power, sharing campaigns from areas and organisations, sharing on Twitter and social media, and for us to get the message out that we are stronger together. We need to follow campaigns like Cascade on Twitter and other organisations. And this is a reminder that you out there are not on your own, because there are plenty of others, as you can see on this webinar, going through this. And we need to keep in touch with one another. Giselle Hode, who I think will be on this today, has set up a Facebook group called Adult Social Care Warriors. So please join that. Fill in the Social Care Futures survey so we get your feedback if you haven't already. And In Control will be keeping in touch with those here today We need to get the messages out. We need to get the information available. We need easy read versions too. Enough is enough. Be brave and be challenging. And I'm going to hand over to Sally.
Thank you so much, Katie. And I'm actually not going to say much else because Katie has just summarised exactly why I, sitting in a little organisation called Paradigm, working alongside with and for people with learning disabilities, wanted to reach out and connect, because we absolutely are stronger together, Katie, and it absolutely is time to stand up. So I'm really looking forward to today where we hear from Mitchell, we get the legal information we need, and we support each other to challenge what we all believe is an incredibly unfair system. I could give you many stories of the impact, the awful impact on the lives of people, particularly with learning disabilities, one of whom I'm a carer for, whose life was devastated for 6 months because of a so-called arrears bill that appeared out of nowhere. As soon as I challenged it, the arrears were dropped. They said, oh, made a mistake. And that really alerted me to the fact that so many people are suffering in silence, are possibly paying debts they don't have to pay, and we need to be strong. So today, getting strength from each other, as Katie said, hearing the legal information we need to know, learning from Marilyn and Inclusion London how we can be brave and challenge is important. And certainly for myself and my colleagues at Paradigm, we fundamentally believe in a future where there should be no care charges for social care. We absolutely believe that social care should be free at the point of delivery. And that's the future we're working towards. But for now, absolutely, as Kate says, it's coming together. Let's work towards that. But also in the day-to-day, the here and now, let's help people learn what their rights are, what the law says, and how they can challenge such injustice. So thank you. And back to you, Julie.
Thank you, Sally. So I'd like to give a warm welcome now to Mitch. Hi, Mitch. So Mitch, as I've said, will give us a legal overview and the legal eye on this issue.
Thanks very much, Julie. Really delighted to be here. Very sorry that so many people joined, because it's an indication of the situation we're in. This is the problem with care charges is a manifestation of a deeper problem, which is the cuts to social care funding and to social care budgets, which mean that authorities have effectively tried their hardest to cut care packages as much as they can, and now are taking aim at, I think, care charges. I would just point out, and this is a very quick legal overview, hopefully you'll be receiving something in written form, but this concerns non-residential care charges. I will say something very briefly at the end about residential care charges, but much of the focus of this is on non-residential care charges. This is quite generalised information, and there are lots of nooks and crannies in the law, I should say, but as a quick overview of the law, local authorities have a duty to arrange support for those with eligible needs under the Care Act. What they are then given under the Care Act is a discretion as to whether they can charge a contribution for those services. Now, all bar Hammersmith and Fulham have taken up that discretion, and once they've decided that they will charge a contribution, this must be calculated through what's called a financial assessment. And this is set out in law. There's the Care Act, which has a section dedicated, section 17, dedicated to it, as well as a regulation on charging assessments, and then statutory guidance. And all of this helps to flesh out and provide more information. What is also the case is that councils will have their own charging policies, which you may be able to find on their websites. And it's important to say that what councils put in their policies, they're entitled to have policies and set them out in the way they want. But what they can't do is go below the statutory responsibilities set out in the Care Act and the regulations and the guidance. So if they go below those standards, there's a good chance that their policy isn't lawful. I just wanted to go through some of the key messages that I think people should bear in mind when going through the financial assessment process. And the first one is hugely important and often forgotten, is that the overarching principle is that people should only be required to pay what they can afford. So councils must ensure that people are not charged more than it's reasonable for them to pay, and they can never be charged more than the actual cost of the package, which shouldn't even need to be said. The other thing to say is that the financial assessment must be comprehensive. Councils can't pick and choose what goes into their financial assessment. They must look at everything to make sure that they assess people properly. And a third point is that the financial assessment process must be clear and transparent so that it's applied consistently and so people can see and understand how the final figure has been reached. It must also ensure that any financial assessment must ensure that it supports social inclusion, independence, choice and control. Therefore, councils can't make arbitrary decisions. For instance, if you attend a local gym and you're charged a certain amount as part which you need as part of disability related activities, and the council say, oh well, your gym charges you £30 a month, we only allow a fund of £10 a month, or we know somewhere across town that will charge less than that, they must take into account your particular situation. Another important thing is that the financial assessment policy must encourage people to stay or take up education, employment and training. So what shouldn't happen as a result of the charges you have to pay is that you can't actually undertake training or employment or work as a result, because the charges mean you can't afford the costs to do that. I just want to move on to the give you a few sort of highlight points about the financial assessment itself. So the completing of the financial assessment is obviously hugely important, and there are really three main steps that need to be considered. The first thing that any financial assessment should do is look at the capital any person has. So, for instance, any savings they have. If a person has below £14,250, the council cannot put any charge on the capital amount that you have, those savings that you have. Between £14,250 and £23,250, they are allowed to take, there's a sliding scale that allows them to take a proportion of the amount that can be charged. Basically, they can charge £1 a week for every £250 you have over that £14,250 figure. And then anything over £23,250 has to be any amount over that sum, any care provision has to be paid from that capital amount. Then there is the second element, is the assessment of any income that a person receives. So most benefits are taken into account in the financial assessment process. Some of them are partially or fully discounted. For instance, the mobility component of DLA or PIP can't be taken into consideration. And there's a list in the statutory guidance. Annex C of the statutory guidance contains lists that set out what benefits should be taken into consideration and can't be taken into consideration when doing the financial assessment. And there are other factors probably to be aware of. For instance, if a person if you receive rent, and it's not fully covered by housing benefit, if you're renting property and it's not fully covered by the housing benefit, the additional amount you have to pay should be taken into consideration when calculating your the financial assessment. The third aspect is one of the trickier aspects, which relates to disability related expenditure, because there's elements of discretion in this. But the basic rule is that the charging arrangement should ensure that they keep enough money to cover a person's costs for any disability related needs that they may have. For instance, if a person requires a pendant alarm or for their own protection, if they should fall in the home, and the charge is £8 a month, that should be taken into consideration as disability related expenditure. There are lots of other examples as well, and a number of those are covered again in the statutory guidance, but it's not a comprehensive list, and it's not supposed, the guidance makes clear that it's not supposed to be a comprehensive list. So councils can't disregard anything you put forward as disability related expenditure on the basis that it's not on the list. They must consider each situation that's before them. And the final point, and when dealing with the financial assessment, is that when determining the charge that a person must pay, the council must always ensure that a person is left with something called the minimum income guarantee. They cannot take all of your money or what they consider you should have to pay. The guidance sets out the amount that people should receive, should always have, which is seen as the subsistence amount that they should have to live on. And that's roughly calculated as being equivalent to income support plus a buffer of 25%. It's not a huge amount, but the figures haven't gone up since the minimum income guarantee amounts haven't gone up since 2015, when the Care Act first came into force, which I think is pretty concerning, given that costs haven't stayed the same during that period. But the amount of minimum income guarantee can depend on certain factors based on age and what benefits, other benefits you might receive. One other point I'd just like to make, and I'm sorry I'm going on, is that to highlight that, unlike with most benefits, the council can only assess the income and capital of the person who is subject to the financial assessment, not their partner. So if you have a disability and are receiving a financial assessment, if your partner is in work, the funds they receive can't be taken into consideration. If there's money held in a joint account, unless it can be shown that one partner owes an unequal amount of has an unequal share of that money, then the money will usually be divided equally. But so that's maybe something to consider thinking about. But I just wanted to highlight some important points to remember at the end when having a financial assessment. One is that when you receive a financial assessment, the council must provide you with a written record setting out the assessment. They must also, another important point, is that they must consider any disability related expenditure. It's not good enough for them to say, well, we've looked to see what benefits you're on and this is what you have to pay. They've got to complete the process and consider anything that must be deducted from that amount. In that respect, it's important to keep receipts as evidence, or to take receipts to demonstrate any disability related expenditure. For instance, if your food bills are high because you require a specific diet, it's good to keep receipts so that for a month or so that you can show the council that this is what you have to incur. And make sure that if you're not happy about anything that's being said, put it in writing. Don't trust what they say on a telephone to you. If you're not happy with what they've said or you don't think it's right, put it back to them in an email. Make sure it's on the record, because sometimes people get given information that just isn't accurate, I'm afraid. And the last point is, don't suffer in silence. If you're not getting clear answers or you've got concerns, you're probably not the only one. In fact, this webinar demonstrates that you probably won't be the only one. If you've been given a huge bill saying that you've got to pay huge arrears, don't internalize that process. Speak to people, speak to organizations, get support, because it's not always the case that that's the right thing. I'm sorry I've gone on for so long, but thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Mitch. And Mitch will still be around to ask questions. So there's a number of questions that are already coming through. So just a note before I move on to the next speaker, there is a key messages document that the panel that are here today have all helped. So Inclusion London and Mitch and others have all joined in getting this key messages document together. And that includes things like examples of what you can put in DRE, the disability related expenditure. And it also has detail on the minimum income guarantee, and Inclusion London also gives us a wonderful draft of a letter. So as Mitch has just said, you can write to your council, so there's a draft of that letter as well that people can use. So we will be sharing that. If you've registered to keep in touch, we will send it to you, or you can download it off the Be Human website. Okay, well, we're going to move on to our next speaker now. And that's John from Inclusion London. Welcome, John. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for inviting Inclusion London today. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. I've been campaigning on social care charges for many years, and I've seen the awful impact on deaf and disabled people, carers and older people. I've seen people being pushed into debt, pushed into deeper poverty, people having to make unenviable choices between putting food on the table and turning on the heating. It's an awful tax, a tax on disabled people, a tax on disability, which needs to be challenged and scrapped. Yeah, it's a wonderful opportunity, as some of my colleagues have already mentioned, to work together to apply more pressure on central government and local authorities. So for an example that just sprung to mind is that with local elections coming up, if any of you listening are living in a county or a borough, which is a close call, where it's not clear whether there'll be a Labour or Tory or Lib Dem administration in the local election, it could be an opportunity to ask them to insert a policy to scrap social care charges. In close elections, politicians are always looking for extra votes. So please do get in touch if you live in a borough or county council that's in this type of position. Inclusion London's position is that social care should be free at the point of use, like the NHS. And unfortunately, many people believe that social care, like the NHS, is free to those who need it, but as Mitchell explained, that's not the case, and that if you do have a certain level of assets, you end up having to pay. And I've met people who've dropped out of social care because they can't afford to pay and have gone into crisis and landed up in hospital. So a big campaign and vision of Inclusion London is to transform social care so it's free at the point of use, like the NHS. I suppose the best example to give is that it's very unfair that if you have the misfortune of having a heart attack, you'll get treated free from the NHS, but if you have dementia, you pay for it, and you could pay for it with your home. However, social care charges being scrapped is a longer term objective, and we have launched a campaign today with a petition that hopefully my colleague can share in the chat. And along with a number of campaigners and disabled people, we produced a powerful 8 or 9 minute film, which is also on YouTube. And I welcome you all to use it, to edit it. If you come up with better ways of on TikTok or Instagram of sharing the message, that's wonderful, but please do let us know. So, as I mentioned, social care free at the point of use is probably a long-term objective. So we've been doing a lot of thinking over the last few months of what we can do in the short term. And as Mitchell has talked in more detail about, is the minimum income guarantee. And what we are thinking of doing amongst groups of deaf and disabled people's organisations is challenging government to raise that. Obviously, that doesn't mean scrapping social care charges, but the minimum income guarantee, the MIG, hasn't been raised in years, but the costs of disability have been going up over the last decade. And so that's one way of putting more money in people's pockets. Another idea we're exploring is trying to find a particular local authority who will work with us to introduce a best practice guide, for example, which would include the disability related expenditure and rights to assessment, etc. And once we've co-produced a document with a particular local authority, it's then to see if we can have a domino effect by going to another local authority. Can you adopt this? And perhaps going to ADAS and the local government association, and thereby having some type of good practice document that cascades around the country. So again, those are two of the short-term objectives that we're looking to work on over the next year or so. Unfortunately, my colleague Svetlana, who's a disability lawyer and is also an expert on social care charging, couldn't join us today. However, she is running a training session on the 29th of April with Jenny Hurst, who some of you may know, who's another expert, and it's her day job around care charging and disability related expenditure. And I'll share those details with Julie to email out later. And finally, we do also have a disability justice website, and which has lots of details about social care rights, including charging, and some template letters. So thank you again.
Thanks, John. And last but not least, we've got Marilyn. Hi, Marilyn. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, thank you. I knew that was going to happen. I've got 3 dogs here. This really is Be Human, and we just had a delivery. So sorry about the barking. Yeah, I am a Norfolk. Sorry. Thank you. Sorry about that. I knew it would happen just as I started. I'm a Norfolk resident and a member of JRIMG, which is the JR Implementation Monitoring Group. The good news is that Norfolk got this judgment because it's the first time that the first judicial review on the Care Act since its inception in 2015. Lead won the case, representing a young disabled Norfolk woman of 24 years. And the reason we got this really was that we formed a group within Norfolk, and we actually campaigned in every conceivable way for 2 years before we got to this point. And basically, the group in charge in our area is a Conservative group with a massive majority, and they just did not want to listen to anything that we told them. And all the opposition parties were supporting us, but we could not get heard at all, and we really did try every form of communication. However, in the Norfolk case, they took every single penny that they were allowed to take under the government's charging system into account for the assessments. And following a consultation in November 2018, there were 95% against their policy, but still they carried on and ignored independent advice at that time too. So our approach was twofold. We challenged both the council and the government. And Leaday initially took action not only against Norfolk County Council, but also against the Department of Health and Social Care. Sadly, the case across the government did not get granted a judicial review, and Leaday did consider appealing that decision at the time, but decided on balance to concentrate their efforts on Norfolk County Council. This, however, does not mean that further actions against the Department of Health and Social Care may not go ahead. The basics of the judgment are that there's a cohort to whom it applies. And that cohort, I'm sad to say this, but is called the severely disabled. And that is defined in SH's case by the fact that she receives enhanced levels of PIP daily care. She also gets enhanced mobility, but this income, as Mitch said, is not counted towards the assessment. And she's in the support group of the Employment and Support Allowance. Thus, being in this group means that the DWP give her higher benefits to meet her needs. However, this means that she has more income that is to be considered and included in her assessment. The definition of the support group, and the judge makes this definition in the judgment at section 12. I don't know if the judgment's up there. My assistants were going to put it up at some stage, but the definition of the ESA, and the judge says, SH, this is section 12. I just want to use this so that people can realise it really is quite easy to understand if you ignore all the sort of long legal precedents, which, you know, that's what the solicitors argue. But in section 12, it says ESA is an SH receives employment support allowance at this rate because she has been assessed as not having capability to work due to her disability or illness. And so, and at section 51, sorry, I'm going to make you jump around now, of the judgment, part 2, a less severely disabled person who may have access to earnings from employment or self-employment has those earnings entirely disregarded under the council's charging policy. So basically what we're saying is, owing to the level of her disability, she has more income from benefits, making her charges higher, and no income from employment to offset the charges. In addition, as we've had mentioned a few times now, the government have not raised the minimum income guarantee level since 2015. So any increases in her DWP benefits go straight to the council in their charges if they stick to the government MIG levels. On section 30 of the judicial review is quite important. The judge looked at the guidance for councils, and in 8.46 it says, the government considers that it is inconsistent with promoting independent living to assume without further consideration that all of a person's income above the minimum income guarantee is available to be taken in charges, which is exactly what Norfolk were doing. And the second part, local 8.47, local authorities should therefore consider whether it is appropriate to set a maximum percentage of disposable income over and above the minimum, the guaranteed minimum income guarantee, which may be taken into account in charges. And so those were the points on which we won really, and we were forced to take this action from the complete refusal of the council to listen or to take any notice of our arguments, which were the arguments that Lee Day depended upon to win the case. The only counter argument that the council had were, one, that they needed money, and two, they tried to argue that SH could gain employment and was not severely disabled. And at one stage, their barrister took some considerable time trying to convince the judge that SH's direct payments were income, which, you know, everybody was shouting at the screen that was watching the case. The judgment did not accept the need for money was a reasonable argument from the council. We know that councils are short of money. We know that the government have starved them, but it is still not a reason for taking money from disabled people's benefits. The DREs, to offset the charges, we have found are inconsistent, not only from LA to LA, but between people within the same authority. The whole topic in itself needs, well, it is a whole topic in itself that needs proper focusing on. And in fact, that is something that as a group we are going to do with the council and our members shortly. We did find, we did actually sent in an FOI to the government at one stage to ask them if we would have a list of the mid-levels being charged in every LA across the country and their DRE system. And lo and behold, they don't monitor it, they don't hold those details. So they offer a policy to local authorities, but then just forget about it, which again, I think is totally unacceptable. What I would advise for anybody facing these charges is to find other people, as Mitch says, around you, and to start a group in your own area. If you're concerned, so will others be. Find people in your area and fight together, because it's so much more difficult for the council if there's a group of people compared to knocking off one person at a time. At present in Norfolk, we've started a task group called JRIMG, Judicial Review Implementation and Monitoring Group. The details will be sent to you afterwards and on the stream, but we are at JR Monitoring on Twitter, and we have a Facebook private group, which you are quite welcome to join, called JR Implementation and Monitoring Group. We're a disabled-led task group, and we're set up to do exactly as the name says. We're meeting with the council and we're trying to ensure there's co-production and cooperation going forward. Through co-production, Hammersmith and Fulham, as we all know now, have no charges and have proved that it saved money as well. We feel very strongly about nothing about us without us has never been more important. And so please do make sure that your groups include disabled people who are very capable of speaking for themselves, you know, and are not just, well, I don't mean just because I'm one myself, but are not simply carers, but are inclusive of disabled people or even disabled-led. Going forward, JRIMG as a group have written to every adult social care director advising of the judgment and asking what they're going to do in their area. Their responses always included the same phrase. We've written to the Department of Health and Social Care and the National Association of Financial Officers for advice. And some say they're taking legal advice too and will write again when they have further information. Thus, we've written to both the Department of Health and Social Care, Helen Waitley and Matt Hancock, and the National Association of Financial Officers, and asked what advice they're giving. I'm not holding my breath, but we have written to them and asked them. In Norfolk, our Director of Adult Social Care, James Bullion, also happens to be the President of ADAS, Association of Directors of Adult Social Services. He told us he's spoken about the JR to other local authorities wearing that hat. Going forward, legal advice, lead day barristers that took the case, Zoe and Emma, that's Zoe Leventhal and Emma Frobisher, who won the case, are producing legal advice for people in other authorities. Cascade have recently raised £6,000 in a crowdfunder to pay for this legal advice, which should be available in the next couple of weeks. The person dealing with it now going forward is a lady called Marilyn at Lee Day, and she's happy to be contacted directly for general advice by people. And on our fact sheet that I sent out, I've sent her email address. But Cascade have been seen as a central gathering of the many possible cases across the country that can benefit from this judgment. Personally, I would advise that it makes sense for any action going forward to be through Lee Day, as I have seen advice given which is dubious, and Lee Day produced and won this case, which took a year from the time that SH and her mother as litigation friends stepped up to be the claimants. They know it inside out, Lee Day, and as such, in our opinion, should carry it forward in applying it to other authorities and possibly the government if they have the evidence. And in order to get that evidence, we need everybody to take part in this. So we need to advertise this wherever and however we can, and just make these grassroots groups grow bigger and bigger and support each other. So to sum up, there's strength in forming your own local groups. If you're concerned, so will others be. Refuse to be refused. We were told time and time again that Norfolk County Council were working within the government guidelines. They weren't. If you feel you or the person for whom you care or advocate fits the SH cohort and is being asked to pay impossible charges, then urge your LA to apply the judgment. And if you need legal advice, the initial advice, as I say, is coming in 2 weeks. If you need specific advice, then do get in touch with Lee Day. I think that's it. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Marilyn. So I appreciate that's an awful lot of information from a variety of different people. As said on an earlier screen, the webinar's being recorded. When we do the recordings, we then upload it onto YouTube. So if you feel, oh, it's a lot of information that to take in and you want to sort of cross-reference it with the key messages document, by all means use that and do that, and you'll be able to catch up with it on YouTube as well and slow it down and pause to sort of make sense of it, because I know you've had an awful lot of information from a variety of people. So we're opening up for questions now. So some came through in advance. So panel, can I ask you that if you're able to answer the question to unmute yourself? So there's some that are sort of directly at Mitch. And one is, if people have debts, can that be taken into account of a disability related expenditure?
Hi, Julie, thanks very much. If a person has debts, remember one of the things I said at the outset was the overarching principle is that people should only be required to pay what they can afford. If you are in debt already, the council should not be putting charges on you that increase those debts. Therefore, they should be looking to factor those in. The debts may not be regarded as necessarily disability related expenditure, unless of course they've been incurred as part of that. Debts can occur in lots of different ways, but the key message is that you shouldn't be charged so much that those debts just increase and get worse.
Brilliant, thanks. And does anybody on the panel know whether the figures for savings will change in April? So we've said about other things not changing and not moving. Is the savings amount, does anybody know whether them are changing in April? Okay, so we're not sure about that, Ravinda, but we will find out and get back to you on that. And another question. Oh, sorry. Go on, Marilyn. Do you know the answer to that?
I don't think so. We've all recently had new reviews because of what's happened in Norfolk, and they haven't changed the savings amount thus far.
Yeah. I mean, I think they tend to keep them all the same, don't they? So another question is, again, there's an awful lot on disability-related expenditure and what you can and can't spend on disability-related expenditure. So the question is what can you do if you have a disagreement on disability-related expenditure? I'll let you have a think of that, and then I'll be coming through to the attendees. If you want to ask your question live, please put your hand up, and I'll start looking at people with their hands up for asking questions live.
On that question, can I speak?
Yes.
Yeah, there's an appeal procedure with the Council for Disability, or there should be an appeal procedure related expenditure, and you ask to appeal it. You complain in writing, as Mitch said. And I questioned my daughters, and then I was told that there was a second stage of the appeal as well, so you can definitely appeal it.
Okay, so Donna, I know you. Oh, sorry.
No, it's good to, when you're having this issue, keep having receipts, and is a really important factor. Often councils, or sometimes if, for instance, you require, it's a health-related issue where it can't be funded. You won't get funding through, for instance, with a special diet, you wouldn't get funding through health. If you have a doctor's letter highlighting that you have this condition, any additional money you have to pay because of your special diet should be taken into consideration. But it's having that evidence, whether it's through reports or through receipts, that can be very helpful.
Brilliant. Thank you. Donna, I know you're online and you put something in the question, and you've been through this where you have challenged a disagreement on DRE, even gone through to the Ombudsman. Do you want to unmute yourself? Oh, you can't. Attendee can't be unmuted until you've entered your PIN. Right, Donna, if you want to put things in the chat, I'll try and come back to you. Simon Smith?
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm in the same area as Katie. I've got quite a complex situation. I got diagnosed with autism and ADHD very late on in my life. I was working for the DWP, which put me out of work before I got my clinical diagnosis. I've been trapped in a health and social care system. They're not providing, they just give me direct payments, but I've got health need. I've got they can't find a service for adults with autism either, so they've trapped me in between learning disability and not providing me with the continuing healthcare assessments. I had a law centre who were helping me, and a brokerage service from National Statistics. I challenged them in 2015 on the disability-related expenditure, and they're still they increased my care charge when I transitioned to PIP. I get employment. I fall into exactly the same benefits that the lady that's won the case in, the case in Norfolk. I fall under the same principles, I believe. They've increased my care charge 2.5 years when I got transitioned from DLA to PIP. And then, I brought it. I was told only yesterday by this new social worker that they can't find me the support that they haven't even done my care plan since 2016, and they've upped some money for my direct payments, but they were competing with the care charging manager, was saying, can you put that in his direct payments rather than his disability related expenditure? I mean, they've left me AA expense that there was given an allowance for. They now want me to do chits and put them into me bank. I mean, and now they want to take off. I've got a surplus of £20,000 of direct payments from last year that I haven't been able to use because there isn't services to use it with. And they were threatening to take that off me when they've already deducted the care charge of £47 a week off it before they've even put it in my bank, and I've still got that surplus left at the end of this 12-month period. And they give me 26,000. So I've topped up about £1,000 of my own out of my benefits. And I haven't got services to meet my needs, and I've been in a crisis trying to get my needs met. So is that is that lawful? Because to me, none of it seems right to me. That I'm struggling at this level.
Okay.
And I can't find services. They can't find any services to meet my needs. So I mean, I can't get I haven't got a treatment pathway for my ADHD or a social care. They were talking about speech and language therapy to me a number of years ago, and they haven't. And they just told me that, well, that's a waste of time. And I had a care treatment review done a few months ago by CCG, and I've had meetings with them, and then they were talking about doing continuing health. And none of the assessment processes are autistic friendly. And I'm left without an advocate to be able to, a general advocate, to be able to, you know, with autism. I've got communication needs.
So it sounds to me, Simon, that there's an awful lot more than charging there. There's a whole range of stuff around continuing healthcare or autism-specific services. So rather than, unless there's anybody on the panel that wants to try and answer some of the stuff around just putting money into the direct payment rather than the charge.
Well, I mean, the question out of all that, I'm sorry, I'm trying to just give you the summary of it, but the question out of all that is, I thought the principle of care charging was you have your care package in place that's meeting your needs, and all they're doing is, I mean, I've just got a care charge letter, a new one 2 days ago when I was reaching out in distress, crisis. I was told by the National Statistics I should be ringing safeguarding, which I rang yesterday. And I've got the letter, the new letter, and they've viewed the disability-related expenditure that they've left in there is what the laws, 2015. They're using the same figures. They haven't updated the figures, and there's loads of headings. They've allowed me £5 a week for communication, when communication is the core of my assessed needs. You know, it's the one thing I need the highest level of help with, and so they've determined the amounts of disability-related expenditure based on, and then they're saying that's been provided by your direct payments when they're not supporting me to use that direct. So I don't understand the precedence, because
it's an interesting one, because there's been we've had quite a group of people coming saying, well, should I still be paying care charges when I haven't had care over COVID? So let's pick that one up. But Simon, if you get in touch with us separately as well, we'll try and help.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I know it's a bit of a big one. Thank you.
So any thoughts from Mitchell, Marilyn, or John, or anybody around?
Yes, well, certainly in Norfolk, you certainly don't pay care charges if you're not receiving care. That was, and I believe that's a government instruction, a coronavirus instruction. I see so much. I'd have to look it up. But I'm pretty sure you should not be paying for charges for care that you're not receiving end of. I'm surprised to say that there's £20,000 left in your direct payment account, because what they do in Norfolk is claw it back. And so
that's what they're saying. They're going to claw it back, but they've already deducted the care charge for the year off the amount that they've allocated. They've allocated money for things that I can't find the services I need, and so they're giving me. I mean, I'm in the joint working team ombudsman. I've had the local government ombudsman said they must provide me with seamless care and support from 2014 across the boundary of health and social care, and I'm still waiting for a joint working team 2.5 years later. I mean, it's just, I'm just in a complaints process with trying to get my care needs met. I mean, it's just, I mean, I'm at the end of my tether with it, to be honest. And my fiancée is, I mean,
I'm not surprised you're at the end of your tether. It sounds awful. But the one key thing to remember is councils cannot charge for what they're not, for services for something they're not providing. So if you get that money, absolutely, you should get that money. You should get your contribution back.
Yeah, I need some help, though. I mean, I'm going to need to come on.
There's lots to unpick with what's been going on. It sounds like it's been going on for a while.
I mean, I've been absolutely on my knees with it for too long. But I've had a lot of people trying to help me with it over the years, but it's just they've pulled out. You know, I've even had a law centre looking at it.
It's a nightmare. Thanks, Simon.
Anyway, I'll leave it there, because obviously mine's a bit complicated. Thank you for your help.
Well, keep in touch, and I'm glad you connected with us. Tom, hi Tom, I'm coming to you. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, I'm also part of Katie's group and Simon's group in that matter, and we've set a small group emphasising care equity as our standards. And my question really is, has anyone any experience of challenging local authorities of whether their policies and procedures about vulnerable adults, I hate the phrase vulnerable, but that's what's in there, whether they're in breach of them in the way not only to charge people, but communicated or failed to communicate to people effectively about charging. So it's not just looking at the national standards. I think the Norfolk group is outstanding. It's fantastic work you're doing, and it's great to learn from them. But I think even locally, I think there's potential, and this is what we're starting off with in Calderdale, is to challenge local authorities about breaching their own policies and procedures, over how they say they should work with good practice with disabled people and so-called vulnerable adults. So it's just wondering if anyone's had any mileage in that way.
Just to come back, oh, sorry.
That's all right. I was just going to say that we've had to insist time and time again that information sent out is sent out in easy read as well as, you know, but there's still people within the authority that can't access, people who are blind that have asked for the information to be sent out to them in a particular way, and it isn't. And it just seems a little bit like the last questioner said. It's really hard work, and this is why you need to get together in a group, because it becomes overwhelming in the end if you're on your own.
The other point to highlight is that if, for instance, you're blind or you're particularly vulnerable and you can't access the information that in the way it's being provided, that there is an argument that amounts to disability discrimination. Because the information should be provided in a way that everyone who needs it can access it, and therefore there may well be a fundamental failing in the council not addressing that.
Yeah, it's just, I think it goes further than that. I think the whole tenet of the communication over charging is itself potentially harmful to people.
Yeah.
And I'm just asking whether the impact of the consequence of potential harm, I'm not going to say abuse, I'm going to say harm, is something that we should challenge local authorities about, because they have a duty not to harm people in their...
I mean, interestingly enough, the survey that we did, Tom, from Social Care Futures, we actually said about levels of stress and harm, both financial stress and anxiety stress, it was causing on the charging. So it'll be interesting once we finish that survey to get some analysis on that nationally as well, around that issue.
That's very helpful, Julie. Thank you.
I'll pass it on to you, Tom. I'm going to come to Matt Stab now. So if you can unmute yourself, Matt.
Hello, guys.
Hello, Matt. How are you doing?
Oh, yeah. I'm good, thanks. Interestingly, I got a positive spin. And I don't know whether it's like this all over the country. But because I work for a user-led organisation in Wiltshire, but I'm also a disabled person in my own right. I have cerebral palsy and receive care through a direct payment. But the last few times I've been assessed, I haven't had to pay a contribution because I work. Is that the case right across the UK? Does anyone know?
So there's obviously some issues, isn't there, around if you're in employment, whether you have to pay charges.
Your employment is any funds you earn aren't taken into consideration. That's right.
The point is, if you work, the money that you earn is not counted towards your income for charges. That's the point.
Yeah. I get that, and I always class myself as one of the lucky ones because I don't have to pay charge. But I was just asking, is that right? That's right across the UK.
Well, it's meant to be, Matt. It's meant to be.
Oh, right.
What it does highlight is and this is obviously with the SH and Norfolk case, it highlights that people who can't access employment are in a much more vulnerable position, and that's something that's, I think, reflected in the judgment.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like I said, I work for a user-led organisation, and it's quite interestingly, because Wiltshire, like Norfolk, is quite rural, and we've had a couple of cases about high charging, but people don't seem to be coming forward until they're at total crisis point.
Yeah, yeah. And I think what you're describing, Matt, as well, as Marilyn said, is getting people together locally really puts power to people's elbow.
Yeah, exactly.
So there's one in the chat as well from Gazelle saying Surrey have just cancelled last year's charges due to having little or no services following appeal and complaint. So people coming together and doing that jointly is much more powerful.
Yeah, I mean, even before I started at where I work, I've been saying for years, I didn't choose to be disabled. So why did I have to pay for a care charge? Because I don't choose to. I wasn't. You know what I mean? So even before I started my employment, my employed life, I always had an ongoing battle with the local authority, because I kept saying I don't choose to be disabled, so why do I have to pay for my care when no one else does? Do you know what I mean?
I do. Thanks, Matt. Just okay. Another one. Sorry.
That's okay.
Okay. Another one in the chat is that the council, and again, this has come up with a number of people, the council have put the charges up in October, but only told people themselves in January, but then told them that they had to back pay those charges to October. Is that lawful? So this is where people have, where an authority's made a decision, told people, and then back paid when they should be paying it from.
Council do get away with this. I think it's really bad practice, and this often manifests itself in people being given very big invoices to pay. And I think, once again, that's where I think there is an issue, where they put people under considerable pressure because they've decided to go back, and meaning that people accrue a very big debt. That should be taken into consideration when recognising that people can't just pay that, don't have that money lying around to just pay this money off.
But is it lawful, Mitch, that they can just suddenly change it and tell you and then expect you to pay something 6 months previous to that?
Councils have been allowed to backdate their payments. I think it's a really dubious position, because I think there's an argument there that if they put it up without telling people, it seems to me that people budget on the basis of what they're expecting they have to contribute, and I think there is an argument there. It's a challenging one, because councils say there are all sorts of reasons why their systems don't necessarily work properly due to underfunding. But it's certainly something to explore. But councils have got away with that sort of thing in the past. Whether it's never been challenged in this climate, I should say.
Okay, so we've just short of 20 minutes. So I know there is a lot of questions in the chat box. Sally, I'm going to ask you to have a quick look in the question box, and I'm going to come to Joe Stewart.
Hi there, thank you very much. Great webinar, by the way, really, really good. Just a quick question. I've got twin sons of 19 who are moving from residential to supported living in August. They'll be living on nothing except their benefits, but we as their parents want to top up their money, i.e. pocket money, to give them a sort of slightly better standard of living. We've asked the local authority whether they take that money into account in terms of calculating their care contributions, and they've come back and said they don't want to answer that because they don't know. But I'm wondering if any of the panel have any idea on whether income from parents to children, pocket money, counts as income to be taken into account when calculating costs. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo. Any thoughts from the panel? John? Marilyn?
It's Sally.
Oh, Sally, go on, Sally.
It's Sally here, and I'm going to say this on recording, but I would keep that arrangement informal.
Okay.
I don't know where that stands, but I'm certainly, I hate the term main carer for someone with a learning disability, and it's an informal thing that we do to make sure her quality of life is better than the bare minimum.
So do you have a separate bank account, or it's just easier to be upfront because we can put it through one bank account? But I do understand.
Yeah, I might need to rely on Mitch or legal. I don't know where that stands legally, but I know from the many people I work alongside people with learning disabilities and those I advocate for, it gets very complicated because it can be seen as income. But Mitch, is that something you can say, or do we? I
think if the payments are not made, if there's not a guaranteed amount coming in, it's much harder for them to consider it as income. Getting support from family members is not is not per se income that should be included.
No.
Obviously, that's more difficult if they're seeing the same amount coming in on a bank statement every month. But so it may well be that it's maybe not easier to administer, but it's more safe to provide it as and when it's necessary, or you feel it might be useful for your children in that respect.
Well, the other thing, Mitch, I think is trust funds. That gets horribly complicated again, but a trust fund is a way of ensuring there's money that isn't counted as income as well. So, but that gets complicated.
There are lots of things around trust funds. There are lots of things about pensions as well that could be explored. But if we're talking about small sums, you probably wouldn't want to go down that route.
I totally agree.
Yeah, I mean, I just wonder. I know parents would say it's a gift.
Yeah.
So it could be that just a lump sum goes into their account for Easter, birthday, Christmas.
That's exactly what
holidays. You know, you could do them even, quite systematically across the year. But in effect, they are a gift to your children. Pocket money is a gift, isn't it? It's not an entitlement or an income. It's a gift. So I think.
Sorry,
Julie.
Yeah.
That's a very good point, Julie.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's what we do. Is that okay in response to that question?
Yes, it's fine. Just working out the best way to do it. We want to just try and give them a little bit of a better life. We wanted to give them a regular monthly amount, but I can see the pitfalls potentially in doing that. We also wanted to pay the carers food, so they were all eating together, which is one of the things we wanted. But yes, it was just to sort of try and clarify something that's not easily clarified. I guess that. But
it's crazy that lovely natural stuff becomes an issue, which is a tragedy of the system, isn't it? Really, so it's crazy. But I'm going to move on then, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your help. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie, it's Sally. There have been a few questions about what happens if you don't pay. Is one, and then there's some questions, obviously, from Sue Levette around what about people who access day opportunities that get charged for that? Can the day opportunity charges be claimed as disability-related expenses? I think that was right, Sue. You might want to speak. But first thing is, what happens if you don't pay? Are there people just refusing to pay?
Yes, there are, but they take it anyway out of your direct payment accounts and then expect you to pay it back without your permission, they just take it out of the direct payment account, and then if you don't pay it back, you haven't got enough money to pay for your services.
Yeah, okay.
So if you're not, then has anybody any experiences where people have not got a direct payment and just refuse to pay? Because I've not known anybody be taken to court yet for non-payment.
I certainly know, Sally again, I certainly know of a family in the Midlands who have a, their loved one has high complex needs, high support package, they're refusing to pay the care charges and nothing has happened. And nothing has happened in terms of penalty or anything. But they are holding their breath all the time. It's not the way to live. But yeah. So I think we've been talking with colleagues around the country, our colleagues, and a lot of them are organisations that offer support to people with learning disabilities, but it's saying, well, can we do a freedom of information? What happens when you don't? What do local authorities do? My sense is, and this is my sense is, that if you have I'm going to use those awful terms, a mild and moderate learning difficulty, get less funded support, you're more likely to get it taken somehow. Whereas if you've got a high package of support, I think many local authorities would be, this is just hearsay, very scared to take away your support because it would be a threat to life and to health and safety. So they're not going to remove support, but they might.
No, it was general in Norfolk that they just took everybody's out the direct payment account unless people were silly enough, and please don't do this, to sign to have it taken directly from their benefits or to sign, you know, in some other way.
Yeah, there's a few coming through the questions saying that they've refused to pay and they're currently in dispute. I'm gonna, with about just short of 10 minutes left, I'm gonna come to Andy McCabe. Hi, you just need to unmute yourself and we'll do this one as the final question. Hi, Andy.
It's a two-part question, if that's okay. One is about the minimum income guarantee, but with permitted work. So in my situation, I receive all the benefits that you've mentioned before, so ESA, full PIP and severe disability premium, but I also do occasional permitted work. Does those two things together existing will they take them both into account or not?
They won't take your paid income into account for your charges. They'll only take the benefits into account.
Okay, because I wondered if whilst also taking the benefits. Okay, so that should be clear, hopefully then. And then the second part of the question is, can the DRE take into account private medication costs and appointments with consultants for medication that isn't available on the NHS currently?
Well, that's an interesting one, because with my daughter, they allowed some medication that her dog, which out of desperation, the guy who came out said, shall we call it a pat dog, which she sort of is. And they allowed some medication that the vet had non-prescribed medication had said would be helpful for her. When it came to my daughter, the doctor had suggested that she took some medication which I had to buy. It wasn't on prescription, so I claimed for that, and they disallowed it because it wasn't on prescription, or because, you know, whatever. Initially they disallowed it. I think in the end they allowed it. I had to appeal it, so they allowed it for the dog but not for the daughter.
So the medication,
there's an issue if you can't receive it through, if it's not something that is accessible through the NHS, then there is an argument. It gets more complicated when it gets to supplements, and it can become difficult. But if it's something that's prescribed as an emergency, or as a particular treatment that's just not available on the NHS, then I think there's a strong argument.
Yeah, that's the case. It's a prescribed controlled drug, but you can only get it by prescription through a consultant, but it's currently not on the NHS or funded by the NHS.
Then I certainly think you have an argument. This is the difficulty with DRE, disability related expenditure, that there's an element of discretion from the council, though they've got to be consistent, and the way they apply that discretion can sometimes be challenging. But it does sound like if it's for your disability, so there's no reason why they shouldn't consider it.
Okay, well, that's brilliant. Well, thank you very much. That's really appreciated, and a great talk as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Donna
thank
is
you.
back online now, who we tried to go to first. So if you just unmute yourself, Donna. So this will be the very last one now.
Julie, it's Sally, can I just pick up the thing about day opportunities and whether the charges, because that's a big thing for people with learning disabilities. I just want to get an answer if we can. I mentioned it just now, yeah.
Yes, I would say that if you're receiving day support, you're having to pay for day support activities that aren't incorporated into your care package, then I think that is a disability related expenditure and it should be taken into consideration.
Okay.
So sometimes there's a day service charge as well, separate to the care charges. So surely that day service charge would be disregarded as well.
And a number of councils now, because they're closing day centres or these are for budget savings, are providing people with alternative options through organisations that will provide activities. People end up having to fund the charges, but that should certainly be regarded as, I think, as disability related expenditure.
Yeah, that's my thoughts on it. Is that yours, Sally? Is that it should be?
Yeah, I think yes. But I think what's happening around the country is truly shocking around this. But Sula Vet's here and is picking up with a fight down in West Sussex around this. So we've all got to connect to get some shared learning and action.
Definitely. Hi, Donna.
Hi, at last, thank you. I had trouble getting on. Are you there? Sorry.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, right. I just wondered if the template letter that you were talking about, if you've already been through the whole of the complaints procedure and the ombudsman and have written to the local councillors, the head of services, and still lost our case, would that letter still be okay to send? And what is the next step that somebody can take if they've gone through all those? We've been fighting this since 2018 and got a bill that is growing by the week because we can't pay it. And I literally was so stressed. I did think about taking my daughter out of the care system, but it's not the right option. So I just wondered, and it was very interesting to hear the lady talk about the dog situation because that's one of our major issues.
One of the biggest issues, isn't it? So this is if somebody's already appealed against a DRE decision, appealed it, complained about it, gone through to ombudsman, and they're still saying, no, we will not pay that disability related expenditure. Is that it? Is there anywhere else you can go?
The next step is legal advice, but I will say that there was a very recent, last couple of weeks, decision by the Ombudsman in favour of a lady on her DREs, again in Norfolk, and Norfolk had to apologise. But we as a group went to the Ombudsman about the minimum income guarantee charges prior to taking legal advice, and the Ombudsman let us down. Well, I say let us down, would not take it on either because they too said, oh, well, the council are working within government guidelines. And so sadly, the next stage is probably a legal one. But you know, I don't know where you go with that. If you've gone through the complaint system that you can with the council, is to take it to a solicitor. Do you agree, Mitch?
Absolutely, yes, I think that's right. And it's also a factor is that obviously this is pushing you into further and further debt, and that there comes a point that needs to be taken into consideration. So even though you went to the Ombudsman, you've gone through this process, the situation now may be different to the financial situation you're in, or your daughter's in, maybe is somewhat different to the one that was being set out at the time. But it's always worth exploring.
So we did go to them because I asked for another assessment, and we were told that instead of asking them to take into consideration the DRE, we should ask for all the things that they want into consideration to be put into a care plan. But they just came back and said, well, actually, you've gone to Ombudsman, and no, we still stand by this. So my question then is if we went for a judicial review or something, is there legal aid available? Because my daughter's not in a position to pay. That's I think that's where the local authorities know they've only got the upper hand, because people just can't go through it because of financial constraints.
Legal aid was available in the Norfolk case. But as Mitch will tell you, legal aid has been reduced an awful lot, so it's not always available. So I don't take that as gospel, but legal aid was available to challenge in Norfolk, yes.
Legal aid would be available in your case as well. The challenge has always been finding there are way more cases than there are lawyers to take on the cases, but it's absolutely you can find a lawyer and set out the situation, and it can be looked at. Remember, financial assessments and care plans have to be reviewed, should be reviewed on a yearly basis. I know they're not, or the financial assessments usually are, but the care plans often aren't, and so they shouldn't be dragging their feet on that.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Can I just add one thing?
Hello, sorry.
Sorry, can I add one thing? I think John will come in on this with Inclusion London. We are trying to get our own database of what the MIG policies are across the country and what the DRE systems are, because obviously some authorities give a blanket DRE to everybody and then you apply for your personal expenses on top, such as Suffolk give £25 blanket to everybody and then you apply for your specific ones, which makes the charges a lot less. And I think Greenwich have a £15 basic DRE and then you add on top, etc. And because we can't get this information from the government because they don't monitor it, we have been trying to make a database. And I believe, John, you've got somebody working on this, haven't you?
Yeah, we've done a bit of work. The main bit was done a few years ago by In Control, I believe. They did a wonderful report looking at the impact of care charging based on responses across the country. So we wouldn't be in a position at this stage because that's a huge piece of work. But it goes back to our idea of looking for a local authority who wants to put together a good practice guide, co-produced with disabled people, carers and older people, and then seeing if we can then like cascade it around the country. One final plug again is it's very clear, and I've been involved in seminars and workshops for years on social care charging, and a reminder, I put we're Inclusion London's running on the 29th of April at 3 p.m. and it will be about DRE, how to challenge decisions, how to check and dispute your financial assessments, and it will be facilitated by my colleague Svetlana, who also has a lot of experience, and Jenny Hurst, who has a tremendous amount of experience in day-to-day working with deaf and disabled people to, for example, reduce their DRE. So people are welcome to join that, as there's clearly a very big unmet need. Thank you.
Definitely, and we'll make sure that link goes out for people as well. And you know, certainly we also In Control will be very happy to try and redo the freedom of information request that we did from the last report on charging. So we'll certainly keep on with it nationally. I'm really sorry that I know there are plenty of questions that we've not answered. We will take a log of those questions and we'll try and answer as many as we can on a document following the webinar. Please keep in touch. If there's anything else you need, email us, get in touch with us, and we'll send out all the links and all the information that's been shared from our wonderful panel in the webinar today. And thank you for coming. So thank you so much to Katie, Sally, Gaynor, Marilyn, John, and Mitch. You've been fabulous at answering some of these questions that have just randomly come in, and we'll do our best to answer the other questions. So at that point now, we're after past, so we'll need to finish. But thanks for coming. Have a lovely afternoon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.